Hi, everyone. Can you hear me okay? Thumbs up from the audience. Great. Good evening. Welcome to another artist talk with Concord Art. My name is Marissa Cote. I'm the programs manager here and have been organizing these talks since January. I'm thrilled that for tonight's program, we're hosting Keiran Brennan Hinton. When I first started my position here back in October and I began organizing talks, he was one of the first people who I thought I have to bring Keiran to speak because of his work and of his ideas. And he's an artist who's been inspiring me in my studio for many years. I first met Keiran about 4 years ago when he came to give a talk at the Massachusetts College of Art and Design. And his work has really stayed with me ever since, and I think it will stay with you too. Keiran is based out of Toronto, Canada, and New York City, and his most recent solo exhibition, or one of his most recent solo exhibitions, Tourist Sentimentality, closes this weekend at Charles Moffett Gallery in New York, so you have time to rush down and see it if you want. I won't take up any more time since I know Keiran has a lot to share, so please join me in giving a virtual warm welcome to Keiran Brennan Hinton. Thanks for being here tonight.
Okay, thank you very much. Thanks so much to everyone who
I
joined.
think you're still muted, Keiran.
Okay, can you hear me now?
I can hear him.
I can hear him.
Oh, I can hear you now. Yep.
Okay, we're good?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, great. I'm just gonna do screen share. Does that work for everybody? You can see my screen? Okay.
Yep.
Great. I'm just gonna go present. Okay, so just, yeah, thank you so much to Marissa and Concord just for having me here. I'm super excited to just talk about painting, and I've got quite a few slides to share, so I'm gonna basically just get started with it. And for me, the whole kind of talk is about painting from life and painting from observation, and that's really, I guess, become the core of my practice. And how I define those two terms is just painting something that's directly in front of you, so not from photograph, not from memory, not from imagination, but painting something in front of you as you see it. And my work hasn't always been derived from life necessarily in direct observation, but I think it's kind of something I've arrived at through different ways, and I'm kind of going to talk about that journey, and as well as, I guess, like the ideas around observational painting, who I'm thinking about as other observational painters, or painters who kind of think about looking and optics in an interesting way, and then also kind of speak about some of the techniques and craft involved in just kind of practically making paintings outside or inside and contending with weather and everything like that. So with that, I'll get started. So this is a painting that I made in grad school, and I'm kind of starting here because it's like the painting I was leaving school and I made this painting for my thesis exhibition, and it's not made from life in the way that I kind of define it now, where you're painting with an easel in the space that you're making the painting. But it was a painting of my parents, and they had just recently divorced, but they were still living in the same house. So I was kind of interested in documenting this space as this like really intensely pregnant moment of an interior kind of like holding this psychological weight, and how color and painting kind of speak to this emotional feeling inside of this interior. So if you can kind of see, and I've got some closer up images, there's two figures. There's one figure sitting in the chair over here, that was my mother, and then another figure sitting over here in this other chair. And the whole painting was about 24 feet long by 4 feet tall. So I was kind of interested also in like how you see paintings over time and how things will start to emerge as you're looking at them. So there's like darkness, the very low value contrast, just meaning that the colors are fairly close to each other. When you look at them, you start to notice them and figures start to emerge over time, which for me kind of comes back later on in some of my observational work. So I made this painting. I'm just gonna flip through some of the images of that. You'll notice a little clock on the wristwatch on the wrist, kind of these little indications of time. So from there, I kind of like, this is not mine. This is a Caravaggio painting. But I kind of was really interested in the way that the viewer could be involved in the painting that you're looking at, and how a painting could make you feel, could accommodate for the viewer's presence. So for this painting I saw, it's in Milan, and it's a Caravaggio painting. And what I was most interested in is the space right here that's kind of left at the table for the viewer to enter in. So it's this like dining table in the biblical narrative. It's Jesus revealing himself, and it's this kind of like moment of surprise. But I think it's so kind of amazing that there's this like, there's a seat literally at the table left for the viewer as you walk up to the painting. So you're kind of involved in the narrative and in the scene as it's happening, which I think has such a immediate presence. And I think it's just like an amazing way for a painting to kind of ground the looker and the viewer in the space that they're standing in. Also, just like the little fruit bowl kind of on the ledge there is such a sweet little moment. And then I was at grad school. So I'm just going to kind of flip through a few paintings that I've seen that have had a big influence on me. And then I'll come back to the work that I made in response, or just kind of in relationship to these more art historical paintings. So this is a Bonnard painting. And I would go to the Yale Art Gallery every lunch break, and I would go visit this painting. And it took me like a long time of seeing this painting before I noticed that there was a figure in the background. So you kind of like, you float up all in the foreground, and then you kind of enter into this purple blue space, and you can kind of see there's this figure bending over right here. And it's like they're checking something out in a mirror or putting on a necklace or something like that. But it's such an intimate moment in a painting that I feel like it's earned as you give more time to the painting. The painting reveals itself and gives you more information. So it was kind of this moment for me where I had been thinking about these dark interiors and how information could be revealed over time. And this is one of the best examples I've found just in other painters who's really like had such a slow reveal in how you look and how you see. This is an Ad Reinhardt painting, and kind of obviously another spectrum, not representational per se, but it's, I think, involved in the same optics and same kind of tricks, where when you first come to this painting, it appears entirely blue, just like I mean, it is a monochrome, but you assume it to be kind of all one. And then as you spend time with it, certain things start to glow or emerge or pulse. So for me, it's like these, like kind of, I guess it'd be like cooler blues that are more saturated, and then the purpler blues that kind of fall into place. And then there's this band of more like diluted grayed out blue on top of that. But you start to see those things, and they start to kind of have this presence as you give the time to the painting. So that's become something for me that is really important, is just the relationship between looking and seeing, and how those things have kind of a temporal aspect to them. So I got out of grad school, and kind of like a lot of people, I think you try and shed a lot of the stuff that you learn in grad school, just in terms of like the conversation, the studio visits that start to dictate how you make painting decisions, but aren't always the most helpful. So I found I was making the work kind of that I showed right at the beginning that was really heavy in its kind of emotional content and personal content. And I went away to LA, I went on this trip, and I brought a little easel, and I brought some canvases, and I started making paintings from life. And they immediately started to feel super fresh and exciting to make. So it was kind of this moment where I could like be free of the narrative of the paintings and kind of just focus on the looking. And there's something in observational painting, I find, that there's no room for thinking because you're spending so much time looking. So you're trying to trace the sun as it's moving, especially during the daytime. In LA, it was super bright, like kind of this warm light, and it was a green building. So it just like glowed. And there's this like ladder shadow that kept moving as I was making the painting. And it was the first time I had to kind of experience that, where you're having to keep up with something moving while you're trying to present it as a still image, which is obviously like an impossibility, but how do you hold on to that feeling of something being made in real time? So then I came back to New York, and I had a studio space there right after school. And I had just started making these observational paintings, and I came back to New York and was like kind of lost in what I should paint. And I had this window in my studio where I'd look out every night, and I just kind of started to paint that because it was just like this, it felt very personal. It felt like a moment of privacy in a side of a city that is often incredibly overwhelming and invasive. and I would paint the window, and it kind of became an ongoing series. So this is still, I made a window painting like 2 weeks ago, and these paintings were made in, I think, 2017. So it's been going on for about 4 or 5 years at this point. And kind of just whenever I'm at that studio, I'll make a painting of the window. So thinking about like repetition and what it's like to paint the same thing over and over again. And there's, other examples of that in our history, whether it's Morandi, but I think it's just, you start to notice different things as you look at the same thing more and more, and kind of like attributing that to also a slowness. So asking the person who's looking at the paintings to slow down in the same way that that the paintings are made. So you'll notice on this, different nights the windows close. Some nights the windows open. I'll just flip forward. And then there was one night where it was, still blue outside and the sun was setting at that time of making the painting. So it's the same way, like with the LA paintings, like trying to keep up with that speed of time as it's moving and as you're painting. So for me, like the beginning of this painting, the sky was blue, and by the end it was all dark because the paintings obviously take a couple hours. And so I should say with that, like they're all made in one sitting, especially for these paintings, which are 12 by 9 inches, so about the size of a large book. And so I need to make them, I find, in one go. So they usually take between 2 and 5 hours, just because it's like you can never really, once you leave a painting, I find it's really difficult to come back into it, especially making a painting from life. So that's just a parameter that I've set up for myself for the small works, to kind of concentrate the amount of attention I'm looking into one day or one sitting. And then I got really interested in window paintings, who's made them, tracing their history. And windows obviously have such a relationship to the frame of the canvas that we're always looking at and through them in the same way that where I think we're kind of taught to look at paintings. So this is a Matisse painting that's pretty abstract, but I think there's just like such a strangely intense, heavy, like ominous quality just to that darkness. So I was looking for other examples of painters who have kind of worked with the same subject matter. This is a Hopper painting, and really eerie. Like I find like there's like having the complete absence of information outside, it kind of really presents that it's this house, you're inside of it, but there's absolutely nothing outside. There's no neighbors, there's nothing around, and just kind of like that. I think there's like a psychological quality to the decisions that are made in that painting. This is Josephine Halverson, and she was a professor of mine at grad school, and I think she runs the BU program right now, Boston University MFA program. She's a remarkably incredible observational painter in general, that I really admire and learned a lot from. And she made this series of paintings of her window. I think she went away to Rome for the American Academy, and she made these paintings, and she had this show where I think it was like, I don't know, 10 different paintings of the same window, but you notice the differences because of the similarities. And I thought that was such a beautiful kind of poetic way of thinking about painting and windows at the same time. With these are just so many, like the softness of the shadow here, how it translates down there, and then just kind of little ridges and things that you really start to like, it feels real. It feels like a physical thing you could pick up. But in the same breath, you're standing in the same place that Josephine would have been when she would have been making the painting, looking out of that window. And I think there's something really, poetic and beautiful in that kind of, in that communication across time. This is a Catherine Murphy painting. I think it's a knockout painting, in the same way, trying to paint a window reflection from life. I'm not sure if Catherine Murphy paints purely from observation, but just kind of like she's using the tricks and the optics of it, where you're trying to paint what's happening outside, what's happening inside with the reflection, as well as whatever's happening on the pane of glass. So, there's the lights outside that you're looking at, but there's also how that mixes with the color of the light and the temperature on the inside of where you are, and how to actually mix that color. I think it's something that everyone who has any interest in making paintings from life should really try and do. It takes like a little while to kind of like figure out what the color is of the night window. Like it's like, and it changes every night, so you can't really, you can't pin it down, which I think is something so exciting. But for this painting, I love these, it's like either the paint or, like caulking that would have sealed the window, but it's just like, it's just paint strokes in the end, but and you understand exactly what that material is. So there's this way that painting from life can really speak to the texture of the world as we see it and as we kind of feel it and move through it. this is obviously the Arnolfini wedding portrait, the Van Eyck painting. And when I first saw this painting in person, it's in England and London. And there's the mirror in the back that obviously, you know, everyone's written about the narrative and the mirror and everything with like how they're made. But for me, it was like seeing this mirror that then reflects back who the people in the painting are looking at is kind of this amazing loop where you're involved while you're looking at the painting in the painting itself. And same with the Velázquez, Las Meninas painting. He is making the painting over here. And then there's the mirror in the back that shows, I think it was the king and the queen. And then by standing in front of the painting, you're occupying that space that is being looked at. So I think that's just kind of this conversation that happens through optics and through looking that is really interesting and kind of sneaky in a way. Like it takes a while to kind of see that you're kind of also occupying that space. So now we're getting back to the work that I've been making. These paintings are still, this is I think in 2017. And but just kind of thinking about all those aspects of painting windows, reflection, and placing somebody in the position of the person making the painting. And then this is in 2018, I went away to a residency in upstate New York, and it's called the Macedonia Institute. It's maybe like half an hour outside of Hudson. And I was there by myself with one other artist and for a month, and it was October. And I never made paintings at night, but I found like a little headlamp in their basement and I asked if I could use it and kind of set up my easel at night and put my headlamp on and really wanted to see what it would be like to paint from observation and from life at night. And this is the first painting I made. And how I did it was have like a headlight on, painting, pointing down to the palette so you could still see the colors that you're mixing, but it wouldn't affect what you were looking at. So even if the headlight is kind of pointing forward, it'll create this glare in front of your eyes. So there's all these kind of like little things that you had to like figure out and work around. But there was something super exciting about like, it felt like seeing in the dark. Or so how I'd make these ones, and I'll show you another one, is kind of like try and mix the color of the night sky, the general color of nighttime on the specific night it was being made. And that's just from being outside and trying to get it as close as possible. And then work the lights into that. So kind of as soon as you start to like lay in these little light tones, you kind of only have one shot at it because it's all wet into wet painting and it can get murky very quickly. So you just kind of like, you can't think about it and you have to have this like confidence that the stroke's going to work out. And there's something like really satisfying about that, where they're maybe like unforgiving, but it just kind of pushes this looseness where you can't really see the painting until you wake up the next day and you turn the lights on. And I think there's something really, really, really nice about that. And for me as well, like kind of the paintings that I was showing earlier, the Ad Reinhardt really blue painting where your eyes adjust, I kind of want that same feeling for these paintings. And this is the first really large observational painting that I'd ever made. It's about 4 foot by 5 foot. And of the same space, there was this barn that me and the other artist I was sharing the residency with would use as our studios. And I was making this painting and it was getting really windy. It was on the easel. So you kind of got to like hold it down. Like there's all these things that like when you're outside of the studio, you don't really think about it until you're actually having to contend with wet paint and rain or snow or anything like that. And one thing that happened with this one was I would shine my headlight into the forest, and all these little like dots of eyes would show up, and it was all these deer, and it was like they're right here, and it was such a wildly like theatrical and exciting and kind of spooky moment where you're kind of just painting at night and things can see much better than you can. Also, painting stars is endlessly fun. Anyone who hasn't done it, to set up an easel at night and kind of try to paint stars throughout the sky is it's incredibly whimsical and incredibly fun. And then at the same time I was making the night paintings, kind of obviously during the night, I was making these plein air observational paintings during the daytime. And there were certain days where it gets super sunny and saturated. And for this one, I had set up my easel somewhere else to make a painting. And then like I looked out the door and the light was casting and dappling through the trees. I was like, oh, like scrap the painting I was working on, wipe it out and bring the easel over to this kind of one spot that was happening at that moment. So I find at nighttime, you can take your time in a different way because the light isn't changing, but obviously painting during the daytime, the light's moving, the shadows are moving, wind's blowing, like you don't know when a cloud's going to go over the sun. You kind of have to contend with all these things that I think set up these like unpredictable circumstances that can potentially lead to like a freshness of painting. That's something that I'm really like looking for and pursuing. And with this one, I'd finished the painting, made it pretty quick. And how this one's made in the same way with the dark ones, a wash of this like kind of transparent green color is made over the whole painting. And then I'm with a rag often wiping away. So you can kind of see in a lot of the highlights, it is about pulling up color that leaves the stain of the color underneath it. So you kind of get this feeling of light without having to use any white, which can potentially desaturate the color. So I was finished this painting, and then I was taken off the easel and I dropped it and it fell on the grass, and I like face first and I picked it up, and I was, thought it was gonna be totally ruined or everything smudged, but it left all these like grass marks on it that I thought were super sweet and nice, because obviously it's a painting of grass, of trees, that it kind of the language made a lot of sense. So I decided to keep it, and kind of for future paintings made outside, sometimes what I'll do is just do the wash layer, drop them in the grass, and then pick them up and then continue to paint into them. So you kind of have this like aspect of the place that you're painting inside of the paintings themselves. This was, these were from a residency that I did in Boise, Idaho. And they're kind of similar to the window paintings, obviously made outside, but looking at this same street corner on different nights. And one thing that would happen in Idaho in the summertime is like the sun would set, and then you'd have this period of time where it would be like glowing blue before night really fell. And some nights like there would be this orange light, and other nights it would be super saturated blue, and you could never really tell what it was going to be. So I kind of love that painting could just be a record of those different moments. So for me, these paintings kind of exist as a series. These were 2 of them of about 5 that I made. And in Idaho, why I had gone out there was to do a residency at the James Castle House, which is in Boise, Idaho. And for anyone who doesn't know, James Castle was an artist who I think passed away in 1977, and he was born deaf, never learned to speak, but he made these drawings throughout his whole life of the space that he lived in and his surroundings and his imagination. And he kind of has this whole wide body of work that I didn't know much about until I went out to the residency. And so this is the shed that he kind of turned into a home for a long time. And he drew this space over and over again. So I thought there was something significant in making paintings from life in places that have, that a certain aspect of the history, but the history is also documented in art history. And I thought there was kind of like something really sentimental in other ways, but kind of communicating to somebody who's no longer there, but through the space that they lived in. There's a lot of like wild stories with the people who bought the house after James Castle's family. There was a thought that he had hidden a lot of his work, because his work started to gain value much more recently. So he did a few shows while he was alive, but then more recently the Whitney has some, and they've kind of got more notoriety. But there was this thought that he had hidden work in the walls. So the owner, after his family sold the house, kind of scavenged the house and like cut all these holes into the space to really look for all these drawings that he may have hidden. So I thought that those moments were kind of, you're not trying to document the space as it once existed for the person who lived there, but more paint it as it is in front of you at that moment. This is the shed from the outside. And then these are a few of James Castle's drawings that he made inside of that shed. So that's pretty much from the exact perspective that I'd made the painting that I showed you just before. So that would have been his bed, the window, the shed. So it's like kind of this way of treating observation and looking as a way of documenting just your everyday surroundings and everyday life. And I think what it kind of does, or what it's done for me, is it increases your attention and your perception towards what you're walking through the world with, and for that to be just like a very beneficial thing. So then I came back from Idaho, and I came back from New York, and I made this next series of paintings in Toronto. And this was actually right at the beginning of the pandemic. So this was last year in March, and I'd come back home to Toronto just for to see family, and I was supposed to be back home just for the week. And then obviously border closed, things started to shut down. So I didn't know how long I would be in Canada for. So I bought a few stretchers and canvases, and I bought some paint, and I set up in my mom's apartment at the time, and kind of just wanted to continue the series of the night paintings, but thinking about them in a slightly different way, where their time felt so strange at the beginning. The pandemic, where like 2 weeks felt like a lifetime. And these paintings for me just kind of became records of individual nights. Everyone's spending time indoors, you're documenting people's lights as they're going on and off. And they kind of just became this, this ritual. So I'd make them almost every night for about 2 weeks. And so these were all set in Toronto. And with this one, you can see like there's obviously this night was cloudy, and how they're titled is just the date that they're made on. But with this one, it started to rain. So all these kind of little drops of rain are just the rain falling on the painting, instead of actually trying to paint the rain as it's falling. And that's kind of the setup. So little easel, French easel. I use walnut oil, so I have that in a little bottle with kind of like a ketchup squeezy lid, so you can kind of moderate the amount that goes out. And then disposable palettes just for practical reasons. And the headlight that allows you just to see the palette, but not really affect the subject or the light condition of what you're looking at. And for all of these paintings, in terms of just more the techniques of them, the palette is pretty reduced in terms of the colors that I'm using. So it's usually just a warm blue and a cold blue. So that's warm blue being ultramarine blue, cold blue is phthalo, warm red, cold red. So warm red is cadmium yellow light, cold red is quinacridone magenta, and then same thing for yellow, warm yellow, cold yellow. The cold yellow was cadmium yellow light, and the warm yellow is cadmium yellow deep. And I kind of like that. It's thinking about color in relation to temperature. And I found with those colors, there are not that many of them, but you have to become really intentional about the mixing. And especially when painting from life, can be too easy to assume you know what something looks like. And I think like the classic example is, if you ask someone to paint an apple, they're going to paint the idea of the apple they have in their head, not the thing that's in front of them. So for me, simplifying the palette really makes it about mixing color as you see them in front of you as it's happening. You can also like play with saturation and like mix complementary colors into each other to desaturate colors. That gives you these like wild range of grays that also has a lot of saturation to it. So I find that when I switched to using that palette, it was really, really useful. This is same setup, obviously, painting from life, but this is where I am right now. I'm in Canada at an old schoolhouse. So this is the building, and I was painting this painting last summer, and it was super buggy. So I had my bug suit on and painting outside at night. For this one, I had to use the headlamp on my chin, so you could only see the palette. And if I had the headlight on the normal setting, all the bugs would congregate because they just see the light. So I had to use the kind of like infrared setting or just red light setting. And what obviously that does is you get all your colors on the palette just become red. So you kind of just have to know exactly where things are going to be, and then bring it inside and actually see what the painting is doing, what the painting is looking like. Let me see, it's just frozen for a second. Oh, sorry. Yeah, we're good to go. This is an Alex Katz painting. And obviously thinking about this at the time of making the night paintings. And I don't know, there's something so simple and intoxicating I find about these paintings that he made at night. The distance you are away from the cabin that you're looking at, the knowledge that somebody exists inside of there, but how you can so simply kind of communicate a feeling of nighttime and presence, is something I'm thinking about pretty often. And this painting is so I'm obviously jumping back now to kind of more art historical references. This is a Edward Vouillard painting that I saw in grad school, and I was taking a class with Josephine Halverson, who I had shown the window paintings of before. And we had an assignment to go find a painting in the Yale Art Gallery and to stand in front of it for an hour, and then kind of come to the next class and report back and kind of just discuss what it felt like. So I picked this painting, and it's pretty small. It's about maybe 12 inches tall, about the size of your computer. And I came to this painting and I stood in front of it and I was there for an hour, and initially just kind of thinking through the brushstrokes and how it's made, the like strangeness of the color. It's very economically painted. There's not much information, but to me, what it became about is this kind of child leaving through a doorway, but looking back at you as they're going. And I guess like that's my projection, whether they're going or coming doesn't really matter. But there was this feeling when I came to leave the painting. So I had been there for an hour. You're just standing in front of this one painting, and you go in and out of kind of thinking in your head and then looking at the painting and going back to your head and kind of back and forth. But there was a moment where I had to be the one that turns away and leaves the painting. And it was like such a strangely intense moment that I didn't expect, where I left and I had to come back to it because the painting in so many ways was about this child leaving through a doorway, but like looking back at you almost like as an invitation to enter into the painting. So then the leaving had this like really intense emotional quality to it that I've always it stuck with me and I've thought about for a long time, just in terms of kind of the power that paintings can have in subtle ways on us as we look at them. So I made this painting up at the place that I'm at right now, which is in Eastern Ontario in Canada, and kind of obviously thinking about the door frames and a painting that can be inviting. Like, how can a painting feel like an invitation to look? And while I've been up here, so I'm in the kind of rural countryside, I was thinking about obviously like other painters who have lived in those types of situations and use different motifs and reference points. And these are two paintings, one by Fairfield Porter on the left, and then Lois Dodd painting on the right. Lois Dodd's obviously a remarkable observational painter that I deeply, deeply admire, as well as Fairfield Porter, but Lois Dodd mainly. And they're both obviously painting the same subject matter. It's painting their kind of laundry as it's drying. And I found I was using the clothesline to dry laundry, and I started painting it, not really knowing or in relationship to these other painters that I admired, but kind of just by happenstance of drying your laundry, living your life, and kind of using painting as a way of documenting that everyday process. But then it's kind of like you start to notice these similarities across time, which I kind of love painting to be an example of, in terms of just subject matter and what's being represented. And for this one's quite a bit larger. So I've made the previous painting in one sitting, and then this one is about 4 foot by 5 foot. And the larger paintings from Observation aren't made all in one sitting. They take place over usually between like 4 days and 2 weeks. But always treating it in the same way as the small observational ones, where I'm not really going back into sections once I've finished them. It's more just to kind of retain a certain type of freshness. But what you get with the larger ones then is like an accumulation of many days into one image, which I think is kind of this like wild spectrum of time all at once. And so sometimes I think about them as like a long exposure of a photograph, like your eyes are open and you're making the painting during the time that you're making it. And what happens is the image that evolves during the duration. So for this one, I had begun it. It was super sunny out. I think it was like August, and the clothesline was up, beautiful days outside, and then it started to pour rain, and that kind of just had to make its way into the painting. So trying to like, I guess with the other ones, I had like obviously left the rain in just from the condition of the environment as it was happening. But for this one, I want to kind of like more emulate just the feeling of it. So another experience that I would highly recommend, or just as like an activity, would be painting rain as it's moving, because you're just kind of like, you're trying to keep up with it. It's falling quicker than you can ever paint it, but there's something like really energizing and exhilarating just about the trying. And you start to notice like some drops are closer to you, some are further away. Like it's like painting the stars. It's impossible, but incredibly fun at the same time. So for me, this painting was just like an accumulation of many days. And but in the end, it kind of just became about this sun shower that happened like maybe halfway through making the painting. And if there's any paintings that anyone wants me to revisit at any point or at the end, just in terms of Q&A, just let me know. I know we're going through a lot of images right now, so I'm happy to either slow down or come back. But we're getting into, this is all the work that I've made in the past year, so it's kind of coming to that. So at the same time I was making these larger observational paintings outdoors up in rural Eastern Ontario, I was making little observational paintings at my girlfriend's apartment in Toronto, and I would bring small canvases in and set up an easel in her apartment, and kind of just, as everyone was last year, like spending time indoors and documenting just the daily routines, buying flowers, the cat sitting there by the window, books are on the table, and kind of like these things move around all the time, but for me, kind of painting became a way of just feeling grounded and spending time in a space. This is kind of just like the setup. The French easel sometimes I find for interior painting takes up too much space, so I just bought like kind of a cheap aluminum easel that folds up really, really easily. Obviously you can see in this one, the cat's moved. So that's like an aspect of painting from life that I think is also really exciting, is that it's what you're looking at, you have to kind of capture just as it's there. And then this is all going to be from the show that Marissa mentioned at the beginning that I've got up right now at Charles Moffett Gallery in New York. And the show's closes on Saturday, so this is the last week of the show. And it's all work that I've pretty much made over the past year at this basically a schoolhouse that I'm living in right now, and then at my girlfriend's apartment in Toronto. So the paintings are kind of about both of those spaces. And these are large observational interiors, painted in the same way that they're not made in one sitting, but over multiple days. But there's little moments in here. So actually, with this one, I am sitting in this right behind this bookshelf, so I'm kind of sitting right there at this moment. And there's something neat about like kind of painting the space that you're living in, because it continues to change after the painting's finished. And I think that I'll revisit this space and this subject matter kind of for the next body of work, but they become these little like lily pads or jumping off points to kind of record time. For me also, like as I spoke about temperature in relation to mixing color, like capturing the temperature of the day or the week or the season that the paintings are made in is also really important. So the windows are kind of always an indication of that. So this one, the window's open, it's super saturated, super green outside. So this painting was made in July of last year. The fresh flowers on the table, kind of like these little markers of what time of year it is when the paintings are being made. And then this painting kind of in contrast, obviously of the same place, but it was made during, I think it was January or February. So it's much paler outside. There's no foliage on the trees. There's this like sharpness to light in the wintertime that I think really like bounces around, whether it's just reflecting off of snow or just how low the sun is on the horizon line. That lends itself to having a different like opacity. And inside of these paintings, there's little kind of references and moments of other paintings. And for me, that becomes just little like nods to work. So in a show, you can kind of trace which ones exist in other paintings. This is a Fairfield Porter catalog that I was looking at in relationship to the painting. So this was a painting by Fairfield Porter that I've been thinking about a lot. And he kind of painted this space, I think in Maine, with his family. And there's so many like sweet little details, whether it's the woman reading and like the light on the book or the light casting in through the windows and the softness on the shadows on the floor, yellow light underneath a staircase, like light dappling through these banisters. Like I kind of like those details I think really ground you in a space in real life, but also I think there's a way that painting can speak to that in the same way. And then coming back to the nighttime paintings, this one made at this schoolhouse I'm in right now, but it was like February in Canada and super cold, and the only heat source is our wood stove. So just kind of the whole process of chopping, splitting, stacking, burning wood became this like ritual that my mom and I would do every day and then into the night just to maintain the temperature in the building. So that became obviously like a immediate attraction in terms of making a painting of that moment, because it's this glow that happens throughout the whole space. There's this warmth to it, and temperature being kind of a subject matter of the work, but just kind of thinking about the light source that's also the heat source for the space. And so this one is made in the same way with the other nighttime ones, with a headlamp and in one sitting. And with this one too, there was a car that went by out the window right at the end of the painting. So those are kind of the tail lights out the window. And this one from the same series, I think it was made in March. So in the same way with it's not super bright outside, or it's bright, but it's not saturated with foliage. And this was this bathroom that my mom and I had made together, because there was initially, when we got to the property that I'm in right now, there was no water. We had to get the well treated and had to basically build this bathroom. So the painting became kind of this dedication and moment of both of reflection and kind of like intimacy with the space that we were developing. So there was like the funnest part of this painting was just painting the shower curtain too. It's like trying to paint something that's transparent and plastic that light's casting through, that's also surrounding a clawfoot tub, and then there's like a shower liner, so like the shower liner is falling inside of the tub, but then like the transparency of the shower curtain changes as it changes color, but also as light passes through it from the window. So those are things that like I never thought about. Obviously, before, when you start a painting, you kind of just be like, okay, let's go, like, let's figure it out. And then as you're painting each moment, like presents all these like wild challenges that I find incredibly exciting, and you just kind of have to like go with it. And it's like learning things from the beginning. It feels like you've never painted before, because you're kind of trying to paint things that you have never painted before. And there's such an excitement with that, with observational painting. And same with like the floor. It was like, I knew it would be like a tiled floor, but the light's casting in through the window that casts directly down, and then it dapples across the tiles as it kind of dissolves into the space. But there's also the reflected light of the shower curtain. So over here on the bottom left corner, it's a little bit more purple. Over here on the top right, it's a bit more yellow. And that's just kind of the light that was passing through the space, going through the shower curtain. And then there's the mirror itself. So the mirror kind of was a little nod or marker of making the painting and through that process, and kind of speaking to observation and just the process of them. Because I think I want them to be very transparent in that way. Like, they're not about hiding, they're not about tricks, they're not about they're just not about like trickery. They're kind of just about laying something plainly and describing something as you see it. And obviously making that painting, I kind of come back to this Bernard painting that I showed at the beginning of the slideshow, but it's something that like, and I find same with the clotheslines, like there's like almost all the paintings have always been made, but you kind of just have to find your own intimacy and your own ways into the subject matter. So for me, it's obviously like the mirror and like all of the tiled floors and the color, and kind of just thinking about that way that we look at paintings, that they ingrain themselves on our memory and our mind, and then they kind of get filtered out in the work that we make. This is the last painting I think I'll be showing. Yeah, it's about, and this is a small painting I made of my girlfriend. She's a writer, and she was sitting on her couch, and I kind of set up the easel, and rarely figures kind of show up in the paintings other than in reflections, but this one more kind of was just a painting about tenderness and looking and spending time with somebody kind of in quiet, but in an interior as, in the space that we kind of all spent so much time in over the past year. And then these are just a few last installation images. So this is the exhibition that's up right now at Charles Moffett Gallery, just to get an idea of the scale, because I know that's kind of tricky with all these slide presentations, is just seeing paintings. And obviously I'm talking about seeing paintings in person, and we're looking at them on our screen. So I'd encourage you to go see paintings as much as possible. But this is just some ideas of how it was installed. Cool. And that's what I got. So I know it's a lot of images, so thank you so much to everybody for sticking with me through that, and kind of also a lot of time in between the first image and the last image. So yeah, so I don't know, I'm up for opening it up for questions, or just having like more of an open discussion. If anyone has anything to say, then I'm more than happy to answer anything technical or conceptual.
Thank you, Keiran. We have lots of questions.
Cool.
Super generative. I'm going to start with an easy one. I'll throw you a slow ball. Do you mostly paint in oil, or are there other materials you're working with?
Pretty much all oil.
Oil.
All oil at this point. And oil, one something I didn't mention was just like I use an oil ground as well. So that was something I hadn't done until after grad school, when you kind of have some more time. And it's I do it where I stretch the canvas. I do 2 layers of like an acrylic ground essentially, and then I do 1 layer of oil ground, let it dry for 1 day, and then do another layer of oil ground and let it dry for 5 days, and then the canvases are ready to go. And what it becomes like this like skating rink surface where you kind of just like run a stroke across the surface and it just like glides. So I find like so much goes into the preparation, even though the painting's made in 1 day. You make the stretching the canvas, doing the whole like apparatus to lead up to the point takes a lot longer, but it kind of all needs to happen for the painting to be made so quickly.
Right. Let's see. I have a question here that says, what would you hope people would understand or feel by looking at your paintings?
Yeah, that's a great question.
As best as you can answer.
Yeah, I mean, it's tricky. Like, I wouldn't ever want to like project onto what someone should feel when looking at the painting. I think I want them to be incredibly open in that way. At this point, they're optimistic paintings. Like, I think I've accepted that. That was kind of in the title of the show as well. Just kind of like leaning into the sentimentality of the work, which I think is very much like a taboo term in art. I would want them to feel energized, excited, like I don't know. I guess, but then in the same way, like intrigued or like slow or quiet. Like, I guess more like these different adjectives, and that's also probably me filling in how I look at my favorite paintings of other people's. Is I get this kind of like energized buzz that like my eyes start to feel more alive and electric, and I'd want some form of that, I guess, feeling.
I think it's hard to look at them without simultaneously feeling like you want to enter the space and like you already have.
Yeah,
I feel like it's kind
that's cool. Yeah, for the show, like when I just did this show that the images of now, like no one really had been to the space that all the paintings are made, and it's like, how do you get someone to care about us paint like a place that they've never been to? But like, so many people came to me at the end, they're like, oh, I feel like I've just visited your home, and I thought like that was really sweet as a reaction, because I think there's like such an intimacy with that, and it really speaks to kind of painting's way of establishing and kind of facilitating intimacy.
Yeah, definitely. There were a couple questions about color palette. So the first one said, what made you choose the particular warm and cool versions of the red, blue, and yellow for your painting? And another one in the same kind of idea is looking to hear your suggestions as far as mixing colors specifically to paint grass and avoiding an over acidy result.
Yeah. So I first with like limited palette, or the temperature palette. That was just something that I had picked up in grad school taking a color class, where I found I had so many different tubes of paint, and it became really difficult to decide what to use. So initially it just started with like quinacridone magenta, I think it was phthalo blue, and cadmium yellow light. It was like a CMYK essentially palette, and then I expanded that to also include the warmer tones of each color. I just find it works in a way that you can get a wide range of color, but it was it's a strange palette because they're all really pigmented paints. Like phthalo blue and quinacridone magenta are so super intensely keyed that like it's hard to calm them down, and they have such like strong personalities. And I find that something like with a limited palette, you get to know your paints in this really specific way where they feel like actual people, like, you know, the personalities of cadmium yellow versus ultramarine blue and how they're going to behave as you introduce other paints onto your palette. So I found just like simplifying was just a really helpful thing for me, and then kind of adding things in when they were lacking. And then in terms of just like grass color, I think like acidity is tricky because like I feel like my grass is often very acidic. But when you would introduce another color, it'd be basically only for that situation. I'd introduce the Indian yellow, and Williamsburg makes like an Indian yellow that is so beautiful and lush and luminous and saturated, and it's transparent, so you can mix it with either ultramarine blue or phthalo blue. And so like Indian yellow plus like phthalo blue or ultramarine blue, and you get this like deep green. But then as soon as you either lighten it or scrape it away with a rag, you get this like super, like I'll show you with I'll scroll back a bunch to the grass paint. Yeah, like this one is pretty much just Indian yellow and I think ultramarine blue and a little bit of quinacridone magenta to kind of like cut it down a little bit, but then paint that over the whole surface, and then with a rag, like picking up the color, so you get this like warmth of the yellow underneath the green without actually having to add more paint. But another quicker way to get to that color, which is pretty much this, is Williamsburg green gold. That's like a super beautiful color. It's a bit expensive, but it's like it's gold. It's green gold. It's surprising. It catches you off guard, and it's a really great tube of paint.
Great. If anyone didn't have their pen and paper ready for the paint recommendations, the talk will be on YouTube, so you can reference back before you go to Blick. What advice do you have to force yourself to quickly capture a painting within 2 to 5 hours? What do those steps look like?
Sorry, can you repeat just one word and what you're in the question?
Yeah, what advice do you have as in terms of painting quickly, 2 to 5 hours?
Yeah.
Things like that?
I get have like a comfy stool and like and just like have no other distractions, like place your phone somewhere else for that period of time. I find also like making, as I described with like the nighttime ones or some of these like outdoor ones, like doing a wash of the general color over the whole canvas just gets it in, so you don't have to actually fill in every part. So I'll show you like with like with the nighttime ones, these ones actually can happen in like an hour and a half, 2 hours, because I'll mix that blue and paint the blue over the whole canvas first. And then you're just like painting these little like jewels of light into it. And it's it starts to like emerge as you're painting it. Well, you develop the horizon line first, and then like the lights down a street and kind of all these things. So I find doing the full wash of the painting to make it, to take pressure off of kind of composing and filling in every square inch of the painting, as well as like starting super small, like, you know, they could be 8 by 10 inches or 5 by 7. Like the size can be, if you can work quicker on a smaller scale, or you feel more confident about getting that done, I feel that's like a totally valid way of just like practically scaling it down to be able to capture it in one sitting.
Just a heads up for folks, we'll probably just go a couple minutes over 8 so we can squeeze in these last few questions. There was a question about your process, and mainly when you're saying about you don't go back to a section once it's finished. And I think the larger part of that question is, how do you know when you finish this section, but also any, I guess, comments you have about process as well.
Yeah, let me flip to like one that would be an example. I guess these ones are kind of like that. It's more just like, it's hard to describe because it's intuitive, and I think so much of painting is intuitive, but it's like leaving enough information absent for the person looking at the painting to kind of fill it in. I think it's like give space for someone looking to complete the painting, as opposed to kind of trying to over render or over describe. At the same time, I want little moments of hyper specificity. So for me, like the flowers on the table, there's paintings of those flowers on the wall, or the wires of the back of the fan, like those things that are very tactile, I want to describe in full. And it's also like listening to your eye as it moves through a space. You can't focus on everything at once, even if you're standing there for a week or a day or however long the painting is made. So it's kind of like whatever your eye rests on, like that gets made and that gets painted, and then it kind of dances around and moves. So I find it's like, you don't really ever know, there's not really rules for it. The paintings, like, I find hit a point for the larger ones where like they feel hopeless, like 2 days into a painting, because you're like, I don't know, it's all confusing, nothing looks like anything. And then you start to like piece a little bit in, and it's like building a space in a way. So it's like once you paint the walls in, that gives some solidity for the window to exist. And then like you're basically building it visually, all at once, but you kind of see it happening over time. So I find just like not getting super frustrated in those moments, or like, I don't know, learning to step back and like let things be what they need to be. And like your eye kind of recognizes like when you see something that is enough information to be describing it, as opposed to like needing more. So for these ones, they're made in the warm yellowish wash. Also, another great color paint is quinacridone gold brown. It's a similarly remarkable color, and it has a wide range of colors that are tones for it. But paint everything this like golden yellow, wipe things up, and then like can leave so much of it that color, because like wood grain kind of glows when the sun hits it. So I think like looking and listening to the things that you're painting, but also seeing what the material can do in itself.
Okay, and I have a question about staging your paintings. Do you ever rearrange things for the sake of a good painting, or edit out what doesn't help it?
Not really. Like I used to a lot, for sure. And then things start to feel, I found, contrived, or I would just feel like strangely forced, where I want them to have like a life that's being lived, that you can imagine someone who's just like exited the door or come in or left something on so this is like apron I got my mom for Mother's Day that's patterned and hanging on the banister. So like that was just left there, and then it became like it was like, oh, that's a sweet moment to focus on in the painting, but that wasn't really the plan from the beginning. Staging, setting up, totally legitimate. Obviously many artists like do it. You can get really specific lighting conditions. For me, I just find I like to have the surprises, whether it's like, if I kind of like thought about I'll show you the shower curtain painting before making it, if I knew like that would be such a like difficult, strange thing to paint, I probably wouldn't have. But like kind of just like setting up and going for it opens up all these possibilities. And I think about a lot with that, like the James Castle, the artist that I went on the residency of his house, who he just drew his surroundings for his whole life. And like, it's minuscule movements of his head that make a different drawing, but it's like you get so much information just from the repetition and the consistency, that I think they're always going to find things to look at and paint, even if you paint the same thing over and over again.
So there's a question that kind of takes us back to school, or just leaving school, and it says, when you talk about graduating from school, you say you needed to forget things that you learned. Can you elaborate on that a little bit more?
Yeah, I think depends on what program you go through, and depends on what school you go through, like all those things. But it's like the program that I went to is really intense with studio visits. So you have like 3 studio visits a week with different visiting faculty. So the amount of like suggestions, recommendations, and thoughts that you're being given about your own work became, for me, overwhelming, where I also felt like I always had to be defending my work and justifying it in each presentation, whether it was a critique or a studio visit. And that always puts you on guard, which I find is like not a super helpful place to make paintings from, for me. And I think that's also just like indicative of like the graduate school that I went to. So it's not necessarily the case, obviously, for everybody or for every program. Kind of probably better if it's not. So I found just like unlearning, like, you know, someone comes into your studio and they make a recommendation that maybe it's just something that they're thinking about in their own studio and has nothing to do with you. And like, you don't know that at the time because you're really malleable in school and like just trying to like absorb everything. So I found just like letting that go a little bit, which led me to make paintings from life, because you don't really have to think while you're making them. Like you kind of just have to learn intuition. But I guess that's kind of just what I meant when I was talking about like, it's not unlearning school. It's just kind of like filtering out what's useful and what maybe can get stored away, or you can just shed or find your own relationship to your work afterwards.
So there's a question about scale. I think you answered it earlier, but I'm going to throw it out there. And if you want to just answer quickly,
Sure.
When you work larger scale, do you keep the time limit, like the 3 to 5 hour time limit, or do you stretch it out depending on the size of the painting?
Pretty much stretch it out. It's like, yeah, I'm not rigid to that time frame. Usually just more like I want to get one thing done in that day. So if that's like I want to get the shower curtain done, like I want to get that done in that one day sitting, and however long that's going to take. Or another day if it's just painting the mirror, then it's just, so if that takes like 2 hours and it's like cool, I'm done for the day or something, and you can kind of move on to something else. So it's more as sections, not as a rigid structure of time.
Another quick technical question. Can you describe your underpainting technique a little bit?
Yeah, it depends on each painting. Some paintings don't have any underpainting. Some paintings I'm finding just like it's helpful to have like a wash to work into. For this one, it was pretty yellow, and so I'll paint the whole thing. Let's say for this one, it was like this kind of like subtle transparent yellow, and it's always for me like transparent pigments work best for underpainting because they don't really there's no white in them, they don't dilute the color on top of it, and you can peel it back with a rag really easily that also reveals light underneath it. So I'll, with a big brush, paint the whole thing this one consistent color, and then get like a cloth rag and kind of like, first for this one, draw in where the window is going to be, and basically it's like removing the paint, so you get like a lighter version where the lightest parts are going to be, and then kind of like adding a little bit more paint so you can pencil it, or like not penciling because with a brush and paint, but kind of map in where everything else is generally going to go. So it's pretty loose at that point. I guess like other examples of like, this is where like a lot of the underpainting gets left. So all the orangish yellow is in the first 2 or 3 days of painting, is just kind of like mapping in all of those things. And I keep it to one color because it's super forgiving. Like you can just with a bigger brush wipe it out and it just fully disappears, or you can like define something and get a lot of information. So I find keeping it just basically a monochrome at the beginning allows you to have a range of just tones, but not have to really deal with color at all.
Yeah. Well, I want to wrap us up, but I think this is a great question to end on. And then we will say goodnight for the evening. Can you speak to your attraction to painting more architectural or human-made spaces?
Yeah, I guess I'm trying to like paint. I think they're paintings of people without people in them, and that's what draws me to these spaces that are personal and intimate. It can feel easy to get lost in painting landscapes outdoors that you don't have a specific relationship or intimacy with. It's also like kind of intimidating as a history, or like, I don't know, it's very grand and vast, and what I'm interested more in is what's really close to you and within arm's reach, or kind of where you're living. So I took a few architecture classes when I was in grad school, and I was really interested in like kind of the ways that spaces impact our behavior psychologically, or as we move through them, and kind of like, I feel like obviously we've become really aware of that over the past year, but it was kind of like a crash course in just the psychology of architecture and the psychology of spaces and interiority. But for me, it's just like, yeah, they're about paintings of intimacy, and intimacy, I think for me, happens indoors in these containers, and the house is a container, the painting frame is a container, the window is a container. So I think I'm really just kind of drawn to that because of their closeness to me in my life, and as well as like the people who I'm trying to paint paintings about.
Well, I will just close with this one comment that someone posted in the chat, and they said that your talk has made them think and look at the space they're in with a heightened sense of observation. I think that's definitely true for most of the people who attended tonight.
That's so nice. That's really cool to hear.
Yeah, this has been so wonderful, Keiran. Thank you so much for making the time and for joining us. It's been such a wonderful talk.
Yeah, thank you so much, Marissa, and just for everyone to coming out today in the evening. It's so much fun to just like, I don't know, talk about painting and chat about it, and obviously fully encourage painting from life as much as possible. So
Yeah.
if ever anyone's looking for fun things to do, yeah, paint at night, paint windows, paint in the rain. Those are three like great starting points I found to be like, just let go of any anticipation of having like a grounding in what you think you're gonna make, and then just kind of like let it happen as it's going.
Yeah, totally. Well, I hope you can come visit us in person sometime
I
soon.
would love
We
to.
would love to
That
have
would be
you.
great. Yeah, no, that'd be so much fun. We'll try and figure it out.
Yeah, we'll rope you into a night painting workshop.
Sounds good.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Karen. I'm gonna let everybody go so we can all have our evenings. But great to see you. Great to talk with you. And take care, everybody. Thanks for coming.
Good. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Good night.
Hi, thank you.